Okay, so we are going to cover the topic the rise of nationalism in India from the political science perspective. Now, yesterday we completed it from a general perspective, which was majorly the historical perspective, also included the political science content, but now it is focused on political science perspective and it can be useful for school and college level exams as well. So, let's start our text with the sources. I will provide the sources first from which I have taken this content. Here are the primary sources, both historiographical and theoretical, that inform the detailed analysis provided. Primary historical sources and contemporary works. Dadabhai Naoroji, Poverty and Un-British Rule in India, 1901, the foundational text of the train theory. R.C. Dutt, The Economic History of India, Volume 1 and 2, 1902 to 1904, detailed historical evidence for deindustrialization. Mahatma Gandhi, Hind Swaraj, 1909, core text of Gandhian political philosophy. Jawaharlal Nehru, The Discovery of India, 1946, articulates the secular liberal nationalist vision. Key secondary sources and historiographical schools. A nationalist historiography, Bipin Chandra, The Rise and Growth of Economic Nationalism in India, 1966, and India's Struggle for Independence. Central to the analysis of the economic critique and a structured narrative of the freedom struggle. Anil Seal, The Emergence of Indian Nationalism, 1968, a key text of the Cambridge School which emphasizes elite competition and downplays ideological unity. John Gallagher and Anil Seal later works on locality, province and nation, focus on regional politics and the limitation of early all India nationalism, Marxist and social history. R.B. Dutt, India Today, 1940, a classic Marxist interpretation. Sumit Sarkar, Modern India, 1885 to 1947, 1983. A comprehensive social history that integrates economic, social, and political strands. Subaltern studies. Ranjit Guha, Elementary Aspects of Peasant Insurgency in Colonial India, 1983, and its editorial role in the Subaltern Studies volumes. Parth Chatterjee, Nationalist Thought and Colonial World, in 1986, explored the derivative yet distinct nature of nationalist ideology. Theoretical frameworks. Benedict Anderson, Imagined Communities, 1983, Theory on the Role of Print Capitalism and the Construction of National Identity. Antonio Gramsci, Prison Notebooks, Concept of Hegemony used to analyze Congress dominance. Michael Foucault, Discipline and Punish, the Archaeology of Knowledge, Concept of Power, Knowledge, Discipline and Biopower used to analyze the colonial state. General authoritative surveys. Shekhar Bandyopadhyay, From Plessy to Partition and Beyond to the For, a widely used modern textbook that synthesizes various perspectives. Judith M. Brown, Modern India, The Origins of an Asian Democracy, 1985, a strong political historical account. These sources represent the core academic scholarship that any deep college level analysis of the rise of Indian nationalism is built upon. Okay, now let's start our main text, which is exhaustive analysis of the rise of Indian nationalism from a political science perspective, incorporating detailed historical context, theoretical frameworks, and granular detail suitable for the most comprehensive college level examination preparation. The rise of Indian nationalism, a comprehensive political science analysis. Introduction. Conceptualizing nationalism in the colonial context. From a political science perspective, the rise of Indian nationalism represents one of the most significant case studies in the global history of anti-colonial movements and nation-state formation. It was not a monolithic or preordained phenomena, but rather a complex, contested, and dynamic process of political construction. This process involved the deliberate and often conflict-ridden creation of shared political identity, the Indian nation, to challenge the sovereignty of the British colonial state and establish a new legitimate political order based on the principle of popular sovereignty. This analysis will deconstruct this process through multiple interconnected political science frameworks. The structural functionalist analysis, examining the colonial state as a political system and how its inherent structures and functions generated a resistance. The ideational cultural analysis, exploring the competing ideologies and discourses that sought to define the nation. The institutional analytical approach, tracing the evolution of political organization, particularly the Indian National Congress from a pressure group to a proto-state. The social mobilization perspective, analyzing the strategies and mechanism used to mobilize a diverse population into a cohesive political force. First, generative crisis. The political structure of the colonial state. The British Raj was not a passive backdrop but an active generative force whose very political architecture created the condition for its own contestation. First, the crisis of legitimacy and the ideological contradiction of colonialism. The liberal facade versus autocratic reality. The British justified their rule through a dual ideology of the white man's burden, a paternalistic civilizing mission, and the introduction of liberal institution, that is, e.g., the rule of law, a modern bureaucracy, and limited representative government. Rule of law, modern bureaucracy, and limited representative government. However, this ideology was fundamentally contradicted by the reality of an autocratic, racially exclusive state. The Albertville controversy 1883 was a seminal movement that crystallized this contradiction. The furious backlash from Europeans against the proposal to allow Indian judges to try Europeans exposed the racial underpinnings of the Raj and demonstrated that the promise of equality under the law was a sham. This created a profound crisis of legitimacy, weaponizing liberal theory. The English educated Indian intelligentsia, a class created by colonial education system, became the most effective critics of the same system. Schooled in the works of John Stuart Mill, John Locke, and Jeremy Bentham, they wielded these liberal theories as political weapons. They argued with powerful logical consistency that a government that was not based on the consent of the governed and that systematically denied fundamental rights was by the British Empire own philosophical standards illegitimate. Dadabhai Naoroji's political career, for instance, was dedicated to holding British authorities accountable to their own professed values. Second, unification, the unification paradox, forging a political community from colonial tools. Administrative and legal unification. Prior to British rule, the Indian subcontinent was a patchwork of rival kingdoms and principalities. The British, through conquest and annexation, created a centralized bureaucratic state for the first time in history. The Government of India Act 1858 established a uniform administrative structure, with the Indian Civil Service as its steel frame. The creation of all India codes like the Indian Penal Code 1860 and the Code of Criminal Procedure 1898 subjected a diverse population to a single overarching legal system. Infrastructural integration, the construction of the railways, telegraph lines, and a modern postal service was driven by colonial needs, military mobility, administrative control, and economic exploitation, transporting raw materials from the interior to posts. However, these infrastructure had unintended political consequences. They physically integrated the subcontinent, dramatically reduced travel time, and facilitating the movement of people, ideas, and political organizers. They allowed a Punjabi to encounter a Tamilian as a fellow subject of the same political system, fostering the imagination of a shared political community, a process famously theorized by Benedict Anderson as the creation of an imagined community. Third, the political economy of exploitation, the drain of wealth as slogan of sovereignty. From a political science standpoint, the drain of wealth theory, systematically propounded by Dadabhai Naoroji, in poverty and un-British rule in India and by R.C. Dutt, was far more than an economic grievance. It was a sophisticated political argument about the nature of the state and its relationship to the people. The theory meticulously documented how Indian wealth was systematically transferred to British through mechanisms like Home charges, payments for the India office in London, salaries and pensions of British officials, and interest on Indian public debt held in Britain. I'll repeat. Theory meticulously document how Indian wealth was systematically transferred to Britain through mechanisms like home charges, payments for the India office in London, salaries and pensions of British officials, and interest on Indian public debt held in Britain. Interest on Indian public debt held in Britain. Remittances, the savings and profits of British officials and capitalists sent out of India. Unbalanced trade, a commercial policy that turned India into a captive market for British manufacture while suppressing Indian industries. By framing the colonial state as a predatory state that served external interest rather than the welfare of its own people. The drain theory severed the moral and political bonds of allegiance. It recast the relationship from one of ruler and subject to one of exploiter and exploited, providing a powerful material basis for the claim to self governance. The ideological battlefield, competing visions of political community and sovereignty. The fight for independence was also a fierce internal struggle over the very definition of the Indian nation and the political form it should take. The liberal constitutionalist vision, the moderates 1885 to 1905. Key figures are Dadabhai Naroji, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, Surendranath Banerjee. Political ideology and strategy. The moderates operated with a Gladstonian liberal tradition. They perceived the British Empire as a potentially benevolent political association and framed their demand with the discourse of a broken social contract. Their method was constitutional agitation, passing detailed resolutions, sending petitions to the British Parliament, and using reasoned argument and public persuasion to secure incremental reforms. That is, Indianization of the civil services, expansion of legislative councils, political theory and failure. Their approach was based on a brief belief in British justice and the ultimate trump of liberal principles. Their failure to secure meaningful self government demonstrated the fundamental flaw in their model. Liberal constitutionalism as a political theory and was not designed for application in a colonial context where the metropole and colony existed in a relationship of structured inequality. The radical populist vision, the extremist post 1905. Key figures Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Lala Lajpat Rai, Bipin Chandra Pal, the Lal Bal Pal trio, Aurobind Ghosh also. Political ideology and strategy. The extremists explicitly rejected the moderates' mendicancy and faith in British liberalism. They championed the concept of Swaraj, self rule, as an inalienable birthright, not a gift to be negotiated. Their methods involved direct mass mobilization, the use of Hindu religious symbolism, Tilak's public Ganesh festivals, and glorification of Shivaji as a national hero, and a willingness to confront the state. Political theory. They shifted the nationalist discourse from a politics of loyalty and petition to a politics of popular sovereignty and national self assertion. Tilak's famous declaration, Swaraj is my birthright and I shall have it, was a direct, unambiguous claim to ultimate political authority residing in the Indian people, not the British crown. The partition of Bengal 1905 and the subsequent Swadeshi movement provided the context for their rise, demonstrating the potency of their confrontational approach. The Gandhian vision, a moral political philosophy of Swaraj. Key figure Mahatma Gandhi. Political ideology. Gandhi's political thought, articulated in his 1909 book Hind Swaraj, was a radical critique of modern Western civilization itself, including its parliamentary democracy, industrial capitalism, and centralized state. His concept of Swaraj meant self rule at both the individual level, self mastery, self discipline, and the collective level. His ideal polity was a decentralized federation of self sufficient village republics. Gram Swaraj, a direct challenge to the centralized Leviathan state model. Political strategy and technology. Gandhi's methods of satyagraha, that is, truth force, and non cooperation were not merely tactics, but a sophisticated political technology. They were based on the principle of withdrawing consent and cooperation from an unjust state. By organizing mass civil disobedience and voluntarily curtailing arrest and political brutality, Satyagrahis aimed to expose the moral bankruptcy and inherent violence of the colonial state. This moral jiu-jitsu was designed to win over domestic and international public opinion, thereby raising the political and moral cost of continued British rule to unsustainable levels. The non-cooperation movement 1920-22, the civil disobedience movement 1930-34, and the Quit India movement 1942 were large-scale application of this political technology. Fourth, the communal challenge, the two-nation theory and the partition of sovereignty. Key figure Muhammad Ali Jinnah and All India Muslim League. Political ideology, the Muslim League progressively advanced the two-nation theory, which argued that Hindus and Muslims in India were not merely two religious communities but two distinct nations with divergent social customs, religious philosophies, and historical experiences. This was a direct ideological challenge to the Indian National Congress visions of civic territorial nationalism, which defined the nation as including all people residing within the territory of India irrespective of religion. Political science significance. The rise of this ideology represents the ultimate failure of Indian national movement to establish a hegemonic, inclusive national identity that could encompass the subcontinent's religious diversity. It pitted a secular, pluralist vision of the nation against a religious, exclusivist one. This ideological conflict was exacerbated by the British policy of divide and rule, institutionalized through constitutional measures like separate electorate 1909. The political outcome was the partition of 1947, a bloody repartition of sovereignty that led to the creation of two nation states, India and Pakistan, based on these competing national ideologies. Third, political organization and mobilization. From elite pressure group to incumbent proto-state. The transformation of nationalist sentiment into an effective political force required institutionalization, organization, and mass mobilization. The Indian National Congress, as an evolving political institution, Phase 1, Elite Pressure Group, 1885 to 1905. Founded in 1885, the early Congress was a platform for the Western educated elite to debate and articulate moderate political demands. The safety valve theory suggests it was created to channel discontent into harmless channels, but it also served as a training ground for a generation of politicians. Phase 2, Mass-based political party, post 1920. Under Gandhi's leadership, the Congress was radically transformed. The Nagpur session 1920 overhauled its constitution, creating a hierarchical pyramidal structure from the All India Congress Committee (AICC) down to provincial, district, and village Congress committees. This structure mirrored a state's administrative apparatus and provided a capillary network for mass mobilization across the country. Phase 3, Proto-state and shadow government. During the 1920s and 1930s, the Congress began to function as a proto-state. It organized its own arbitration courts, conducted detailed inquiries into peasant grievances, and ran massive relief operations. Its victory in the provincial elections of 1937 under the Government of India in 1935 and its subsequent resignation from these government in 1939 to protest India being dragged into World War II without consultation demonstrated its capacity to govern and its claim to be the sole legitimate representative of the Indian people. 2. Strategies of mobilization and the creation of nationalist public sphere. The print revolution, proliferation of nationalist newspaper in both English, the Hindu, the Tribune, and the vernacular languages Tilak's Kesari in Marathi created a public sphere for political discourse outside state control. This was crucial for shaping public opinion. disseminating nationalist ideology and creating a sense of shared political destiny. Symbolism and political ritual. The nationalist movement masterfully used symbols and rituals to create an emotional connection with the masses. The adoption of the Swaraj flag, the singing of Vande Mataram as a national anthem, the promotion of Khadi, homespun cloth, and the staging of public events like Dandi March 1930, powerful tools for political communication, especially in a society with high illiteracy rate. They created a visual and emotional language of the nation that transcended regional and linguistic barriers. The international dimension, leveraging global politics. Indian nationalists skillfully engaged with the international system to advance their cause. After World War I, they used President Woodrow Wilson's principle of national self-determination to argue for India's right to freedom on the global stage. World War II was a critical turning point. The British decision to declare India a belligerent without consulting Indian leaders and the subsequent failure of the Cripps Mission 1942 irrevocably exposed the hypocrisy of British war aims, fighting for freedom in Europe while denying it to India. The war also economically and militarily weakened Britain, while strengthening the United States and Soviet Union, both of whom were rhetorically, if not always actively, anti-colonial. This created a permissive international environment that made the continuation of the British Empire in India untenable. Conclusion. The contested legacy of a sovereign national state. In conclusion, the rise of Indian nationalism from a political science perspective was a protracted and multifaceted process of political contestation, ideological construction, and institutional development. It was not a singular event but a series of interconnected struggles. A struggle against the political structure of a colonial state that was inherently illegitimate and exploitative. A struggle within Indian society over the ideological definition of the nation itself, putting liberal, religious, and Gandhian visions against one another. A struggle to build effective political institutions capable of mobilizing a vast and diverse population and challenging the state's monopoly on authority. The ultimate success of the movement in 1947 was the violent, contested, and triumphant birth of a new sovereign state. However, the Republic of India that emerged was indelibly marked by the nature of this struggle. Its constitutional commitment to secularism, democracy, and social justice reflect the trump of its civic nationalist strand, while the simultaneous trauma of partition and the persistent challenge of communalism and regionalism are enduring legacies of the ideological conflict. It could not only fully resolve the Indian national movement, therefore, it could not fully resolve its constitutional commitment to secularism, democracy, and social justice reflect the trump of its civic nationalist strand, while the simultaneous trauma of partition and the persistent challenges of communism and regionalism are the enduring legacies of the ideological conflicts it could not fully resolve. The Indian national movement therefore stands as a seminal case study in the complex and often painful process of forging a modern national state from the crucible of anti-colonial resistance. That's it for today. We have completed the whole topic, rise of nationalism in India from political science perspective, and it is helpful for school and college level exams both, and for general knowledge on the topic. Okay, let's end the session now. See you soon.